Hi, I'm Aegis Cores, and welcome to another episode of EU5. I am playing the nation of England. This is a continuation of my series where, in the first part, I went through the stages of the 100 Years' War. I went through a series of battles and wars with France, where I ultimately became the lead union member over them, with my king having both crowns. However, France still operates independently, so you have to move them through the different features in order to ultimately integrate them. However, it will be some time before you can even establish any sort of control. So you can utilize both countries on offensive wars once you kind of get into a position where France accepts assured offense from a union standpoint. They always will share defensive call to arms. However, they still operate independently, so they can do their own separate peace deals. If you are overstretched in a war, they might just peace out, right? So if you go into war with Castile, Aragon, and Portugal, and it takes a lot longer than 5 years or so, they might ultimately peace out. So it's something to be mindful of. They're not like a true vassal or even a true union member as in EU4, where they basically were just a larger vassal, right? So it's something to be mindful of when you go, that they can leave some of those wars. So you still need to be able to handle your opponents independently in case that happens down the line. Or potentially peace out when you get to a situation where maybe you are overstretched. In this campaign, I want to go after the British Isles, right? Consolidate the British Isles region and potentially look towards Iberia as next areas of growth for England, right? Aragon, Castile, and Portugal are areas of opportunity. They are future competitors on the colonial standpoint. So utilizing the mechanics, utilizing both countries and power and might to really start to build the economy, right? You start to share economic benefits across the Union as well. So can I consolidate the French region? They lost some territories in a coalition war, namely some in their central region, and then in Brittany they lost them as a vassal. So we're going to look to rectify that and go to war immediately with Scotland, who's going to call in Brittany, and then I can make them a vassal, and then from Brittany I can start to feed back some of their old cores because they've been split up as well. So utilize those mechanics to ultimately consolidate the French region and make everyone a little bit more powerful. So there are union mechanics that you can vote on, and they'll always vote for it because I'm the senior partner, so everything will ultimately get approved from both military and economic. The vote on succession laws to ensure that we are always capturing the crown, that France is always electing the next ruler that's the same as my ruler as well, to ensure that England always owns both within the Union. And that could change down the line, but there are ways and mechanics to force them to switch their succession towards your heir. As I mentioned before, we want to go to a war immediately with Scotland, and they call in their ally Brittany, which is perfect because France can handle Brittany, I can handle Scotland, and then all of the vassals as well, right? I have a huge vassal swarm in both the British Isles and now also in all of France, and we just overrun both of them pretty easily, right? You just siege down a couple of the forts they have, enough of the territory. Scotland, I should say, is a lot larger than one war, so it will take a second war. They also have vassals of their own, so I want to make sure that I'm taking only Scottish territory, not their vassals' territory, because once you annex them completely, then their vassals then become your vassals. So it's a way to kind of make sure that you're not taking unnecessary antagonism, because that land will ultimately be yours. And then following this war, you're ultimately going to create vassals in the north, right? And they will help me then convert the territory or assimilate the territory to my culture. It'll take a little bit of time because you take that hit against opinion, right, when you're forcing them into English culture. But then they're able to use their cabinet members to assimilate the territory. They can deal with that a little bit easier than I can just because I have multiple things that I'm trying to achieve from a cabinet perspective. In addition, I also have vassalized Brittany, who lost some land in the coalition war that France was involved in between my second and third war with France. And that, was an easy enough annex. I was able to vassalize the whole nation, and they still have some territories that I can feed back to them in a future war, which actually happens at the conclusion of this war with Scotland and Brittany. Because one of my vassals in Normandy ultimately revolts against me, and because the nation that was created out of Brittany joins that, right? They have provinces of interest, similar culture. They joined in. I was able to quickly annex that territory. It was a blink of an eye in terms of a war perspective. And I was able to feed that territory back to Brittany, who's now my vassal, improve their opinion on them. So they're going to be a strong vassal with the ability to help me into future campaigns as well. The Pale will drag you into a number of wars with the Irish states that are still independent, which is fine by me, right? Any territory you take in these wars ultimately gets fed back into the Pale, who's the lordship over Ireland. So I'm more than happy to feed those back into them. It's not a war that I ultimately have to declare down the line. So you're not using parliament or spy networks or whatever. So it's a free CB. There's still a number of nations. It's not territory that I'm terribly need to kind of rush in any particular way, right? They're not really joining any kind of coalitions. I'm still turning attention to Scotland to finish that war, right? Once I kind of siege down all of their territories, they don't really have anything from a territory perspective. They have some vast allies in this Irish area. They also had ally in France that I just kind of fed right directly towards France. And because France being my union member, I can feed them territory, and then the antagonism goes towards them. It doesn't go towards myself. And then, as I mentioned before, I want to make sure that I'm only taking the territory that's directly Scottish lands, not the Scottish vassal lands. So I got a couple of additional vassals over in Scotland. I had the opportunity with a royal marriage with Castile, and I misread the claim throne CB, but I declared on them. I thought it would kind of give me a union over both France and Castile, and I'd be overpowered. But that wasn't the case. I misread who it was for. I install like my cousin as the ruler, but there is opportunities down the line. It doesn't actually present itself in this campaign, but there is opportunities where then relatives can kind of consolidate and you create those unions with the crowns. I also wanted to kind of expand into there, utilizing some of the new mechanics with naval governors, where you can kind of game the system. You can ultimately build like unlimited amount of naval governors, even though you only have a 2% cap. You can build governors throughout all of Iberia, as long as it's on the coast and they're a city. You can build an unlimited amount of governors using the feed towards vassals and then annex those vassals. And then it's just like rinse and repeat and continue to add more vassals surrounding the entire Iberian Peninsula. Create those cities if it's not there, or using the cities to create naval governors, and then chain all of the annexations one by one. And then you'll have naval governors in, all throughout the Iberian Peninsula, which just gives a little bit more proximity, right? Each naval governor gives base of 80 proximity, which is the control that you'll get. And it just allows you to have more control over Iberia than you normally would, right? Without that, all of the territories would be 0 or like 15 after you built the city and a temple and Pound La Canal and bridge or whatever. So the naval governors is kind of a broken system. I'm guessing the devs are going to eventually nerf that, but at least in terms of the patch as it stands now, it's a system that you can kind of gain and really kind of utilize new territories. As long as you can't build a road towards your capital, you can build a governor. So understanding the mechanics of it is a great way to kind of break the system. So you have to kind of push towards naval value from a societal value perspective, which does take a little bit of time. It's not something that's done immediately. You slowly do it. You have to kind of remove a lot of your push towards lands on your estate privileges and laws. So you can get stuck. So it is things that you're learning on the fly as to like how you kind of push, because you need to get towards 50 naval and you start pushing towards land at the start of the campaign. So something to be mindful of. If you want to do it, it's probably worth having a cabinet member from the jump pushing towards naval so that you can get towards the naval governors earlier than I was able to in the 1400s. So with this war in Iberia, I have all three of them in a country. They were all allies, which is actually great for me. I have France in the war with me, all of the vassal swarms, and you're able to overrun them. And the goal that I have from this campaign was I was trying to get the claim to the throne. I put my cousin on the heir of the throne of Castile, and then release vassals in and around some of their major cities. Aragon has Valencia. I wasn't able to release Barcelona just because that being a little bit more expensive. But if I release Lisbon and Valencia from Aragon, I can start to build out the opportunities with vassals, the naval governors, and the land can't connect to Lisbon. So I keep Lisbon and Valencia for myself. I actually make this mistake with Aragon because you can't sell it to the country if they're immediately connected, because if they have the physical ability to build land with their direct territories towards that naval governor, it will be deleted. So I have to release a second vassal and kind of game it a little bit with the vassals on who owns the land directly adjacent to Valencia. So it's something that we'll cover a little bit further in detail. Either way, they have a number of cities, so that's the first phase of this war, was taking out each territory from each of them. And I take out Sevilla down in the south from Castile as well. So they have a number of territories, and now I'm breaking a lot of their power, especially a lot of their major trade regions, right? Each of those cities are major trade incomes for each of those countries. So it helps kind of break them down a little bit. And now we're back at war with them again because Sevilla revolted against my vassal. So right now it's just Castile versus myself. You can see Castile is still broken from the previous war. They only have 5,000 troops. I do think they call back in Aragon and Castile. So even though they're not in at the jump from the campaign, Castile becomes the war leader of the revolt. So they'll call them back in, which is fine. I can break truces so the next war is a little bit easier with each of them, isolate them a little bit more so that I can kind of steamroll them quicker. The goal of this campaign is to take a little bit more land. Well, to finish the vassal that's revolting there in the south of Spain. And also continue to push. Ultimately, I want to take all of the coast so that I am able to then start to annex each of those territories once I have the naval governors. So, taking a lot of that southern coastline can kind of isolate them. It also will isolate Morocco from potentially invading as well, right? If I'm starting to continuously weaken Castile and Portugal and Aragon, then Morocco, with the help of Tunis, will start to get a little greedy as well. So it's something to be mindful. You might want to start south and then work your way up north. With France in my union, you can make sure that they're not declaring wars independently of yourself, so that they're not also jumping on. And those are really the only two threats to take land out from under you, are France and Morocco, if you're looking to expand into Castile as England. But with me having the union over France, it's not an issue, right? So once you kind of take the capital, you can kind of get towards the peace deals that you want. You have more of that ticking war score. Everyone will look to ultimately get out of a lot of these wars, right? Now, Aragon and Portugal are not co-belligerent, So you have to be somewhat mindful. You don't want all of Europe to start to rebel against you. I am strong, but I'm not looking to just continuously fight coalition wars. Especially because if you can see that red heart there, the broken red heart, I've started to force convert the culture in my Scottish territories. So that just kind of breaks their opinion of you, and then countries will ultimately come into a coalition against them. So if you wanted to fight a war, you'd have to fight your own vassal again, and it's like just kind of taking territory that you already have, so unnecessary antagonism. So sometimes you have to kind of wait for some of that to die down until they get a better of an opinion of you, making sure that you're paying full the diplo spend, and that just kind of increases the opinion, increases the amount of diplo capacity that you have, which you can kind of see is low here. But there are texts within the tree in both the first age and the second age that increases your capacity, increases your subject opinion. You're pushing more towards decentralization just because that's the meta in this particular patch, and you're just looking to create a vassal swarm in Iberia that'll just help you with future iterations of the war. I'm using levies right now, but eventually you'll be able to rely on either mercenaries, which is actually very powerful in this patch, or your standing army, which you can just build out a bunch of cannons and just siege things down as quickly as you possibly can. So the first rebellion against Great Britain, the second war against the Iberian nations, you're able to take some cash, get a little bit of an economy going, and let that kind of start rolling. And then from Castile, it's just kind of breaking them down a little bit. Start to connect some of your lands as well, as best you possibly can, right? As areas of opportunity. I'm taking a vassal. I'm taking Sevilla, the city itself, for myself, so that I can integrate that pretty quickly. And then, ultimately, it's all about creating that vassal swarm and utilizing the naval swarm down in Iberia. And as I mentioned before, you always want to pick the increased naval parliaments when you see them. They're not always there, but it helps kind of push along the naval societal values a little bit quicker, and you get a little bit of dev on your harboring towns as well, so that it is valuable in that standpoint. But it allows you to push an extra 2 towards naval each time, and it's a slow progress. I'm still not there. It has taken a little bit of time, but I built the naval in Lisbon, and I was able to then shift it towards my vassal, and they were able to maintain that naval governorship because the land wasn't connected. So after I was able to do that, I went back to war. So we here are in the 1460s, and now I'm going to kind of speed things up within a series of wars, right? It's pretty straightforward. It's pretty repetitive. They get a couple of vassals, Burgundy, who is not my vassal. There's 2 Burgundies. They have a vassal called Burgundy, and then there's another Burgundy that was previously Provence. So I'm not sure how they formed Burgundy, but there's 2 Burgundies. One's mine, one's not. So they're in the war as well. But it's straightforward again, right? We outnumber them substantially. France and myself each have 70,000, 80,000 levies that we can rise up against each of them. And now I'm not necessarily as worried about the vassals kind of rising up or using the countries against me, right? I've sped this up from a series of wars because it's all rinse and repeat, right? Here's the first war where I can kind of start to take territories from each of them. I'm now looking to take territory from all 3 countries in every single war and campaign so that I can whittle them down. I'm ultimately attacking Castile and then taking land from both Portugal and Aragon. And I'm ultimately going to siege both of them down before really they start their colonial empires, right? That's going to start to happen in the next 30 years or so. So it's kind of a race against the clock. I've isolated them along the coast first and foremost. So then they become a country that's like an island within Iberia, that they have no avenue of expansion. They don't have boat capabilities anymore. So they're not building those colonial empires. They've kind of lost all of the ability to expand beyond Iberia. And they also are no longer a threat from external forces because Portugal doesn't have access, or Morocco wouldn't have access to kind of invade and take territory that's not directly contained with them. So again, here's another war. Here we are in the 1479, another phase of the campaign. I think I declared this one in Aragon, actually. Portugal gets called in. Castile was on a peace treaty, so between the two of them, this was pretty easy. Aragon has a number of forts, which just takes a little bit of time, and it's annoying, especially if you're still using levy armies. Starting to research some of the tech for my standing armies, but I'm still relying on levies for the first 100 years or so. And then as I get into the 1500s, I'll have a substantial standing army that I can afford, along with all of the armories and stuff that you need from a tech perspective to build, from a size perspective, right? I now have enough of the manpower where I'm using it. I still need the levies to support because they have a lot of troops, so I just want to make sure that they're not potentially getting wiped. Castile eventually got called into this war as well, so even if they're at a peace treaty, if it takes a little bit longer than it needs to, right? Then now I'm at the 5-year mark. Castile gets called in because of the forts that just took quite a bit of time to ultimately siege down. But again, just rinse and repeat. You kind of get the territory, you expand, and I'm isolating Barcelona now so that I have the ability to then create a naval governorship over there in the Catalan region. So it's just continuing to find those cities or isolate some of those larger towns that I can then push population towards to then build said cities, right? So that's kind of been my strategy of how to expand around Iberia, and then transfer those naval governorships over to vassals and then build new naval governors in the next phase of the campaign in the war. So here we are in the 1790s, another war with all of the countries. Portugal is almost completely done, right? They no longer have the coastline. They have a couple forts, but I can not a belligerent take their territory without the really worry about antagonism, right? There's a little bit of antagonism, but I'm able to kind of siege them, isolate them down, take all of their territory, or as much as I can from like a max war perspective. If they're not the main focus of the war, then you might not be able to take all of that land, but you will be able to take a number of provinces to whittle them down, and then use the next phase of the war to finish them off. Castile's still in this war. They have less forts, so I used one of the previous ones to break all of their forts in the south because they had like 12 forts down there, and it was just more worth it for the next phase of the war to make them break those forts, break them from an income perspective, so that the next phase of the war I just have to siege down the province in 30 days, and then I can ultimately annex them quicker. So again, Burgundy has been called into this war. You have the ability to feed land if you want into France, if you want to expand them further. I think I do that a little bit. I give them a couple of provinces and then make them get out of the war. So now Castile, I'm looking to do the same thing with them, right? Make sure that I'm taking the north of Spain, really kind of ride it along the coast towards Galicia, to make sure that they're then isolated and ultimately removed from potential or building a potential huge colonial empire, which make things a little bit more complex for the 100% war scores moving forward. Here we are in 1501, another war. Going back with them, I've finished the job, right? Complete annexation along Galicia. And how do you continue the momentum and building that vassal swarms? I'm not annexing any of the vassals in Iberia just yet. I'm mainly focused on annexing the rest of my Scottish vassals, as well as some of the vassals in Normandy and in like the Netherlands, Belgium region, because now with the proximity through naval and through docks, I can actually utilize that territory for power. So that's been my sole focus from an annexation perspective. And then once you have naval governors, like, you can game that system, but then you can't build additional governors. So you kind of have to chain all of those annexations simultaneously so that you have the multiple governorships around your own land. So I built all of them within the vassals, and then once I'm able to push enough land into all of the territories that I want so that I'm surrounding them with naval governors, then you start the process of annexing, which will happen in the 1500s now, right? Here we are in 1511, back at war with them. I started some of the colonial game as well. To be honest, I just kind of let that kind of run on its own at first, and they really were just discovering the African regions and settling a lot of their territories in West Africa, South Africa, and then they start to move up towards like Kilwa. So I had to actually start to force some of the exploration into the New World, which my automation wasn't doing from the jump. So just something to be mindful of. It seems like they prioritize shifting downward versus westward. So lesson learned. I maybe take more control of that myself. But again, I was doing a little bit of a speed run because it's in between wars. I wasn't really looking to expand beyond Iberia. I just wanted my strategy to dominate the Iberian region through the use of my vassals. Play kind of a chill game as well, right, where you're understanding a little bit from the colonial perspective. I'm not really a fan of the colonial features in this. You seem to get called into a lot of dumb wars that my colonial nations, and then I'm now like at war with countries that are, have to ship soldiers down, and it's just, it's not something that I was looking towards. So something to be mindful of. I do take some land over there in Brabant, knowing that because I have land adjacent there and there's harbors, I can build docks. So I can use that territory in the Netherlands, Dutch region. And now with Castile, I'm able to then kind of break them from a country perspective. I've created a natural barrier across their land, so now they can't connect, they can't exude any sort of control outside of their own ability with governors. So they're not able to like build roads through to connect their country anymore, and it really kind of breaks them down economically, right? That's usually the strategy I have, is isolate their country. With the governorship, they're able to get a little bit more power than they would have historically, where it would have just been all zeros because they'd have no control. But it, the ultimate objective is to relinquish the ability of them to control their entire region. It makes the next phases of the war easier, right? I can just march my troops into their remaining castles that they have, siege those down with my standing army. I'm at the phase of the campaign where I don't even need to raise my levies. It's not worth it with a population loss that you'll get of it, so I can just use my standing army and my vassal swarms to siege everything down. I just immediately beeline to the castles now, and I'm able to siege things down pretty quickly with the number of cannons I have. I don't have a big standing army because I don't need to, right? Like, I'm overpowered with my vassal swarm. I don't need to waste money on an expensive standing army or merc stack. I really just need to siege down like 5 or 6 castles and then just sit on the war goal, feed some land to France to expand them a little bit stronger, and just finish the job, right? It's just all about capturing all of the territory that they have, and ultimately giving them 100% war score, right? Aragon and Portugal are now completely gone. I just have vassals, English vassals in Iberia. I've started to do the annexation of the territories because I now have all of the governorships surrounding all of Iberia. So it's a unique strategy. It's a little bit gamey from a strategy perspective. As you can see here, I got called into a war, and here over in France has been in this rebellion war for a couple of decades now, and I had no way of joining to help them out, but it's really sitting on this final war goal with Castile, and I was able to then piece them out. So that really brings us to the end of the campaign. I've skipped ahead here to 1593. We are the number 2 nation, great power in the world. I have owned all of Iberia in a series of wars against Castile, Portugal, Aragon, and Morocco. I'm integrating the Pale right now. It's going to take a little bit of time just because they are quite large, and I was integrating some of the Portuguese and Castilian miners that I created. And then you can see here the naval governors. We have built a number, right? I have one there, but if you look at the total naval governors that I have in all of my lands and some of my vassals that I've built and feeded over to them, it's quite substantial, right? This mechanic where you annex and then you're able to kind of exude a lot of control. I've really established a good baseline. Now you can only build yourself 2 naval governors, but with this mechanic, you know, I could have been max and created more around Iberia, but I wanted to start annexing them and just test the mechanic before I go too far down that path, and it works, right? I've built some naval governors in Iberia. I built some naval governors over there in the Netherlands, so it's pretty powerful, you know, to have extra governors for free, whereas you can only build 2 of those, and then I think you can get upwards of about 4 local governors, but those would all be concentrated in obviously proper England, because it has to have a direct road to your capital. And that's why England is somewhat unique in the strategies, because they're isolated. There's no possibility of a road getting to London, other than when they build the channel in several centuries. But there's no possibility to have that road, so you're able to do the strategy where you build a naval governor and then feed that land to a vassal, and then down the line you annex that vassal, and it doesn't remove the naval governor. So as long as that vassal doesn't have access to that land, it shouldn't delete the naval governor. So while you can only build 2 yourself, you can see I have way more than that, and I'll be able to build another one once I annex Sevilla, who have another vassal down there. So it's an effective strategy. The devs should nerf this in a patch, I'd imagine, right? As more and more users are aware and are able to build it. But I think what they should really do is just have the naval governors scale similar to like your capacity, like diplo capacity. You can go over that, you can go over your cultural capacity, but you pay penalties, so it could become exponentially more cost prohibitive to build more over your naval governor cap. As you can see, I've built some colonies in Africa, in the Caribbean, and now in America as well. So I've really established a naval powerhouse of the British Empire. I'm working my way up from exploring up to India to kind of do historical British borders. But my king is young. He's 18 years old. He's, we're the number 2 great power. You can see the woo. I'm never gonna get to them. I'm not even building any large ships because I don't need to, right? I isolated all of my rivals. There was no navy in my area that was ever going to compete with me, and they can't get to my island on any attack. So I was always on the offense in Iberia, in any kind of revolts that would happen in the French or Iberian regions that happened in between the wars, right? It was just pretty straightforward, and just moving me and my standing army around. The Pale had a couple of revolts as well. As you can see here, my ruler is, the king of Great Britain and France and a couple other duchies as well. We're the number 2 great power, and it was a fun run. We've done the colonial game, and we've done, an opportunity with England to really take it any which way you want. You can do historical English borders and start to colonize into India and Southeast Asia and America. But have fun with it, and take it where you want, and use that strategy that I have with the advantage of not having a road connecting to the greater European continent, and allow those naval governors to provide that power and control into all geos. Thanks everyone for watching. Please like and subscribe to my channel. I really appreciate all of the feedback on the first video, and I saw a lot of growth in subscribers, so Hopefully you liked part 2 and learned something along the way. Thanks, everyone.